would like to first thank the organizing committee for inviting me to give a talk, and also definitely to Wang Qiang, John, for recommending me. Thank you very much. My name is Eugene Ch'ng. I have a Chinese name, it's庄以任. And I am a professor at the University of Nottingham, Ningbo, China, in Ningbo. I'm a director, a founding director for the NVIDIA Joint-Lab of Mixed Reality. So my research is very focused on virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality technologies. In the marketing world, you call it XR. I'm also the chief editor for Presence, a 28-years-old journal publishing virtual reality research and also augmented reality. Now, my talk is strategies for cultural heritage education using XR technologies, which means VR or AR. The focus of my research has always been technology, digital technology for cultural heritage. So the contents of my research, cultural heritage, the technical aspect of my research is digital technology. I'm also a fellow of the Higher Education Academy, so I have gone through formal training in teaching for higher education. So I sort of know what it's like to teach, effectively teach students of any level, especially in university, from PhD, all the way from undergraduate to PhD level, and what to focus on. Yeah? And then one of the important program is blended learning or approach. And these are all important to teaching. So XR technologies, and I'm going to give a brief introduction. My research has always been based on data with strong theoretical basis. So if you look at my publications, it's always data oriented and theory supporting the data. I've also had the opportunity to direct, quite many research centers in the past 20 years, and they all deal with cultural heritage. So it falls naturally. So my research and my talk here particularly is heritage education, right? Learning about heritage with history in the background. So how do we traditionally, if you visit a museum, you look at the text and you look at the pictures and objects and you learn a little bit. But how can we use digital technology to push the boundary of what's displayed in a museum, right? Or what can possibly be displayed in a museum so that users learn deeper knowledge, more complex information, right? It has always been the users, the visitors. And so all these technologies that I have been, exploring, developing. I'm also an engineer. My PhD is in engineering. I'm also a computer scientist. My master's in computer science. So I built stuff like this. And the questions I asked would be, how would technology contribute to or add value to an area of research? Can the field in turn contribute to the development of new technology? So this animation you see here is all done in 1994-5, very old. So I've been working with virtual reality for 20 years. Now, when we talk about extended reality, the suite of technologies that is virtual and that is applied to cultural heritage, we're talking about accessibility. So accessibility means that you can get hold of any cultural heritage objects or information wherever you are. So space is then compressed, right? Wherever you are, you have access to cultural heritage. Yes? So if I'm here and I'm interested in Luoyangqiao in Quanzhou, right? Or any objects in Quanzhou Museum, right? I would have access through digital technology. And also time, right? Sustainability as in time. We can access the past, information from the past in a very palatable, consumable way. we can also retain our cultural heritage all the way to the future. Okay, so when we talk about technology, these are the two values that is added naturally. Now, technology has become an integral part of education. There's so many papers, I cited 3 here. A growing body of evidence demonstrating the positive impact of technologies on measurable learning outcomes, which means that if you use technology, you will learn better, right? The outcomes that you've learned becomes better. You grasp more information, you retain more information. Integrated use of technology enables a range of positive outcomes for children and young people, right? Isn't education targeting the young people? Technology has its role in 21st century children or young people education. It contributes to positive outcomes in almost all disciplines that you can find. There are so many literatures do a search in Scopus, Web Science, Google Scholar, so many areas, so many outcomes. And digital technologies are also used at home for schoolwork. Just ask any parents who have children. Do they use computers at home for their homework? Definitely. Do they use PowerPoint? Yes. So digital technology has pervaded the entire schooling, educational systems, and is changing because of that. And also societal culture is changing as a result of the pervasiveness of digital technologies into every aspect of society. And our culture also contributes. We love technology, right? Sometimes we put on our phone, but most of the time we use the phone to access information, right? So society, culture, and technology cannot be separated. We cannot develop in one direction without considering the other aspects. If you're developing technology, you have to look at who you're targeting with these technologies, right? It has always been human-centric. Who are the ones who use technologies? We are. Who are the ones who use technologies to teach us? Our teachers. So human centricity, teachers, students, these are all important components in our development of technology. Okay, so when I say I use data, I mean that I use data from behaviors. I understand the human behaviors through data, quantitative, qualitative. Now, if we talk about digital technology, the benefits of digital technology in teaching and learning, these are all the keywords, right? What benefits does it give us? 24/7 availability, accessibility, sense making, right? You can ask any young people today, where do they learn how to do certain things? Bilibili, Youku, YouTube, or so on, right? Sense making, self-learning, self-paced learning. And Professor Sun in the afternoon, she also mentioned equity, and this sort of self-paced, personalized, self-learning, non-linear learning are all concepts from equity, the learning styles and so on. So all these are learning that we use, from videos, text, and any sorts of media. But if we introduce virtual reality or augmented reality into any teaching styles or approaches, then it adds much more actually, right? So if we put XR inside this graph, we will have very different, also added concepts such as presence, as in virtually in a space, embodiment, as in owning a body in a virtual space, experience, right? When we read from a text on the screen or look at video, there's not much of an experience. It's just a reading of information through our visual and oral, right? And through our interpretation, our brain, our minds. But being in a virtual space has that added dimension of experience. So you can ask, what is the difference between 2D and immersive VR spaces? It is the experience, it is the embodiment and the sense that you are present. okay, in that space, and of course also connectivity. So virtual environments gives you this added space from 2D to 3D where you can enter into and have this sense of presence, but also social presence and all the other keywords. So this means that virtual reality has a different way of that you can learn, but also it is very difficult to do research in this area because you first need to develop that environment, right? The interfaces before you can understand if users actually learn in a virtual environment. It's difficult research. So for example, if you read the news about, this was a few years, not the current Ukraine war, this was a few years ago. So the New York Times created a displacement 360. This is not VR, it's just 360 video where you can look around, okay? When you turn your head. And when you are inside in a headset looking at this boy, that gives you the experience of actually feeling the experience of this boy rather than just reading. Different medium has very different communication of information. Text cannot communicate this experience of being in the same place as this boy. Text cannot, nor documentaries on your TV, they can't give you this sense of being with this person there. So if you introduce virtual reality or augmented reality into your teaching strategies, you have to consider that there's added aspects. So I'm going to move on. So we also created the Sanjiangko Vr, which is in Ningbo Zhoushan Port, 800 years ago, Yuan Dynasty. And it looks cartoon because it's on purpose. We created it as something not real, but it allows you to interact with objects, right? To look at how people live in the past. Some of the items are not accurate because we purposely introduced different items that are not part of the history to see if people notice them, right? And it has been displayed in so many places. We also have development of VR and AR, looking at the same object as in augmented reality. And we developed just recently, so the data comes from all these projects.
Can you see my name label?
One of my students.
On the book.
And we have several students using the same phone, different phones, but looking at one object. So it's multi-user.
That's the button of the model.
And also, of course, Google Magic Leap, which uses LiDAR scanner to scan the environment, and you can put things in here. And other, and scanning technologies allows us to recreate the world as real as this. So this is a real world, and this is in Ch'ng, Malaysia, Penang, Malaysia. Okay, so I scan this. This is from Xiamen, and this is also from Penang, Malaysia. I use the drone to scan them. Okay, so we now can create objects into such a detail, which means that we don't have to be physically there to see these things. We can, so in terms of space, we have compressed space. We can bring this object to where we are, and that allows us a different mode of access to these objects. Okay, look how detailed they are. This is Luoyangqiao, one part of Luoyangqiao, which I'm sure those from Quanzhou would know. Scan it, not very detailed, but it's there. And also, teaching martial arts. I'm a martial artist. I'm a third dan black belt. So I teach, I recorded myself so that I can compare between my students and me, right? Where they are. It can be part of learning. But virtual reality technology creates this new dimension where you can enter into, and you're closer to the heritage than you can actually be as compared to a museum. Now, I have particular viability for XR technologies. VR requires embodiment. We need to be there. And we cannot infer offline behavior to online behavior. Our behaviors offline and online is different. Our behaviors in social media and in a 3D virtual world will be different. And because it is different, right? Learning is also different. Sociality and communication is different within both VR and AR. And if we don't introduce these technologies carefully, there could be negative effects or positive if we design them properly. So our leap from keyboard, typewriter to a keyboard is a small leap. Our leap from touchscreen from a keyboard is a bigger leap. To enter into a virtual world, it is a huge jump. I don't think there are any educational system that is VR now that can replace education that we have, simply because we have not done research, adequate research in this aspect. We need to understand how VR or AR would really add value to education. And that requires understanding our users. Okay? What do we look for? We look for how users would perceive these sort of technologies, what their preferences are, what is their learning style, do they want to be social when they learn, right? And also the fundamentals, behaviors, attitudes, and social communications for the future of education in XR. So if you ask me, do you have any solutions for teaching in VR or XR? I'd say no. We are just doing research, just trying to understand the marriage between technology, virtual reality, augmented reality, and students. Okay, we're just beginning to understand. Demographics, I'm going to just quickly go through this. These are all data from my publications. You would see that in this line, on this graph, the bar chart, most of our young people, they are visual, right? You ask them, how would you prefer to learn? It's always visual. Virtual reality definitely is suitable, okay, because it's highly visual, right? Highly visual. And in terms of gaming, you can also see that it relates very much to this bar chart. Not many of them actually play games in China. What about going to the movies, cinemas, and VR? You can see that VR, not many, because there's not so many systems, but most of them would prefer to go to the cinema, right, in the second chart, but they would prefer to watch movies with their mobile phones or their home devices, right? In terms of going to the museum, many of them, in terms of physical museums, they prefer to go with somebody else. When you ask them if they want to go to use an XR museum, it also is with someone else, never alone. This is the preferences of our new generation. If we want to use XR or VR to teach our children, it's always social. How many times do they go in a year? This is what we see. For how long do they stay in the museum? This is what we see. Okay, so from this data, this data is from a lot of study. In terms of content and experience, right? We also tested 60 participants with VR, and this is what we find. It has always been the contents that arouses emotions. Okay, the contents, the characters, these are very important aspects in the design. So before, in the last few slides, we see that their preferences are important, right? In that area, togetherness, social arrangements, time of visit. In this aspect, it's the contents. So within the individual VR setting, emotional arousals are positively influenced by empathy towards characters, just as the displacement 360 videos that we see. If we're designing contents, right, we need to design them with something from, this aspect that creates that connection, emotional arousal. average time that users use in a museum, if you design a content that is 30 minutes long, they only really access 5 to 10 minutes. 20 minutes is the maximum that anybody would use that. And the most engagement they get from digital technology in a museum is between 3 to 20 minutes. That's the most engaged. So from this data, we know how to design XR technologies that can cater to our younger generations. These are too extreme. On the one hand, they say that I think I will have more fun if I can stay longer, but I felt a little bit dizzy with a VR headset. So technology is not really ready, but people are really ready to get into, right, virtual environments. These are all very positive signs. Is there a relationship between freedom, exploration, curiosity, and familiarity? Yes. When users are in a virtual world such as Sanjiangko, for example, they can create meaning inside the environment. There is memory formation, there is curiosity of the objects that leads to exploration, right? So all these environments raises curiosity. Curiosity in learning is the single most important motivation for anybody, I think. If you're not curious, not interested, you will not be prompted to move forward in your self-directed learning. Okay, so we're beginning to find out, right? There are so many variables that are important in designing virtual worlds, augmented reality objects. In terms of social arrangements, we have 800 samples from all over China in how people come together to use digital technologies. Most of them are two persons, right? In certain instances, there's only one person because the technology is only designed for one person. Given them a choice, they would be two persons or more, but never more than 5 persons. So when you design any environments, 5, 4, and below is adequate, right? 2, 3 is the best. Is there a difference in the preference of being alone as compared to being company? Most people will prefer to be a company, whether it's physical or XR. In terms of multi-user social augmented reality, right? This is what we see. How we communicate in the real world or in social media, all these terminologies, reciprocity, intention, communication, emotion, ease of communication, social presence, these are all tested, right? In our study on augmented reality, we discovered that people communicate as usual, and these things affect one another, right? We're beginning to understand how people would communicate and learn together in an XR museum. What are the expectations? For those who have used AR or VR, they have always wanted more. Okay, so if you look at the graph, even though users have little use of VR across multiple devices, the expectations of the use indicates very high acceptance and expectations. There are also changes. Those who are cinema goers tended to prefer co-viewing. They wanted to view movies together. Not being a cinema goer is a predictor of being distracted. And those who go to cinema as a whole prefers to watch movie by themselves after being in a real movie together, but not those who are in VR. So through all this data that we have, we see that the pervasiveness of digital devices has made us ready for virtual reality. Okay. So after all this study, we also published another article, and my colleague Dr. FT Liao and myself, she's also here in Nottingham, we realized that audience-centric experience for cultural heritage learning is very important. So we have 4 components. If we are to design a cultural heritage site, we need stories, not only stories inside the virtual environment, but also personal stories that can be adapted within the environment. Attractive details, reflective details, connected details, and elaborative details. all this leads to very personal experiences and personal narratives within the environment, which leads you into deep connection with complex information that can never be learned using any other medium. So at this point, right, I think I have 10 more minutes. At this point, I want to say that virtual reality, augmented reality, or mixed reality devices, there are now so many potentials because of the realism of objects and environments that you can create, because of the ease of use of the interfaces that big techs have developed, and also because the audiences, the learners, the students who have been exposed to technology throughout their lives, whether they're born after 2000 or in the 90s or 80s, our exposure to digital technology so far, right, has led us into a state where technology adoption for virtual reality and augmented reality is highly positive, right? As a summary, 21st century users and audiences, particular age groups, have highly positive attitudes towards XR. This means that we can start to design XR for part of our educational curriculum. Can we completely replace our traditional education with XR? I would say no, because we're not there yet. Visits, activities, and learning are highly social. In our design of any XR experiences, sociality is an important element. And this means that communication, reciprocity, intention, ease of communication are all important concepts. Virtual social communication is different, but it is effective because we can speak, right, in our design of the environment. And this is informed by social communication norms in the real digital world. How we would communicate in the real world would roughly be the same as how we would communicate in a virtual or augmented world if voice is introduced. The design of sessions with a particular range of time is important. For example, 5 to 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes has the highest sustained engagement. Can you put somebody in a virtual environment for the whole day? No. Design teaching curriculum for 20 minutes or less, right, is what we have discovered. And since experience is part of the learning, content aspects that has that experiential nature that leads to emotional arousals will become an important element if we're learning about things that requires emotion anyways. Attitudes before and after the use of XR technologies have been very positive, right? Regardless of whether that someone has used VR or AR or not at all, makes no difference. VR XR technologies, once they have used it, has always been positive. Can you say that it's positive for everybody? I would say no, but it is positive, statistically positive for the majority of the people that we have tested with. Audience centricity is highly important. Learning can be, right, facilitated through personal narratives, through attractive details, reflective details, connected details, and elaborative details. So to this point, I would like to reiterate that VR cannot replace traditional means of teaching, but it can be now part of the curriculum, especially when we're learning something that requires us to be there or that requires to interact in a way that we cannot do in a physical world. So with that, I would like to just close this. I just published a book, and this is 2 million years of technology use, or rather technology use in 2 million years of history and heritage. It's just published. You can take a look at the timeline, and thank you.
Amazing speech. I have a question. Will AR or VR affect the sensory preference? And I've noticed you mentioned the cognitive development of the users, especially young users. Like they can also visit the museum, get accompanied. Will they just prefer to stay at home and visit the heritage sites and virtual reality? And young users may be confused the virtual reality and the reality, or they may think that both are almost the same, just like your speech. Like I just listened to your speech in a real site. Yeah, because the
technology is so good. Right?
Yeah, the arrangement, just like virtual reality scenes, and that's a perfect. Even you didn't use the AR or VR. You just made a good use of the Tengxin meeting. I think the human part is very important, especially limited working memory, right? And so, would you share more about the cognitive development of the users in AR or VR?
Okay. First, I would like to tell you my standing. I would prefer to visit, or I would encourage people to visit a real site rather than a virtual site. Okay, this has always been. I prefer to, if I want to eat 一碗炸酱面, I would prefer to go to the place to eat rather than 饿了么. Okay, all of you know what that is. Because that gives me the real experience of being in that place. If you ask me, do I prefer to visit Luoyangqiao virtually or actually visiting it physically? I would say physically. I would encourage everybody to visit Luoyangqiao in Quanzhou and all the wonderful sites in Quanzhou physically. But visiting it physically has time constraints, right? You are limited by hours, by opening times, by availability, by accessibility because of so many people visiting it, so crowds. If you cannot visit that site, it's inaccessible because you can't travel that far, then virtual reality is a solution. Also, in our discovery, in a real human trial, when human users view a virtual augmented reality object in their own home, they view it far longer, deeper, and more engaged than if they go to a real museum. That is the difference, right? A real museum, you go through, you look at it, you marvel at it, but you are so close and so far because there's a glass. You cannot interact with it. You cannot access it. But in the augmented reality, you can turn it, even with one finger, you feel that you are in touch with that object. So there's a clear difference. Virtually, it gives us more information. Physically, it shows us the real thing. Do we need both? Yes. Can we get rid of the physical one? No. We always must preserve the physical things in our life. This is my attitude. And also, you mentioned earlier that young people cannot tell the difference between what's real and what is not real in a really, really perfectly created virtual environment. In which case, the creator and designer has to be very careful. We cannot create a site that is inaccurate and tell our young people that this is accurate. That will be fraudulent, it will be cheating, it will be lying. When we create the Sanjiangko Vr, we purposely created it to be cartoon-like, not so real, so that we can tell the users that this is not the actual exact site. We don't have enough information to create the entire site. We're creating an impression. 印象 and not the real thing. But that impression also gives you enough information to learn, to become more interested, right? So I would say maybe VR gives you a bigger opening, a larger kind of motivation to actually want to see and learn about the real thing. Can VR replace traditional teaching? No. Can VR replace all the wonderful history texts that we have? No. But VR gives you a lot more information that you can't have in traditional media, text, and so on. So I hope that answers your question, John.
Yeah, I think just like movies and real life, that's the difference. Yeah. I think you give a very good explanation. I think VR or AR have the great potential in teaching, especially in a time of uncertainty.
Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful speech.